Usually when we talk about weapons of mass destruction, there's this expectation of physicality. It's basically an engineering problem.
Yeah, right, yeah.
You have enriched uranium or, a sprawling missile silo out in the desert somewhere. And the intelligence agencies can just point at a high-resolution satellite image and say, there it is. There's the threat.
Exactly. It's material. You can touch it, you can measure it, and, well, most importantly, you can bomb it if you have to.
Yes. A physical threat or not a physical threat, it's clean. But then you step into the world of complex belief systems, philosophy, and theology, and suddenly that satellite imagery is entirely useless.
That's completely useless.
They're
Yeah.
looking at a threat landscape that is completely invisible to the naked eye. So welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're taking you to that invisible landscape. We're unpacking a really fascinating, highly detailed dissertation proposal on two concepts: epistemic sovereignty and epistemic integrity engineering.
Which are quite a mouthful, I know.
Oh, totally. But the core mission for you today is to explore how governments and powerful institutions might be covertly managing your information environment. And they aren't doing it through force or like a secret police, but by strategically manipulating complex belief systems. So, okay, let's unpack this. What if intelligence agencies view sophisticated theological or scientific arguments exactly the same way they view a nuclear centrifuge?
I mean, it sounds like the plot of a geopolitical thriller, doesn't it? But what's really fascinating here is that this isn't some wild fringe internet conspiracy.
Right.
This is about a documented structural framework for statecraft. The documentation from our sources reveals how state actors view certain ideas, specifically ideas with immense viral potential, as direct existential threats to the national balance of power.
So they don't care if it's true.
Not at all. They assess these belief systems completely ignoring whether they are objectively true or false. The intelligence apparatus just doesn't care about truth. They only care about an idea's capacity to rapidly shift demographics, alter loyalties, and basically upend institutional power.
To understand how they actually do this, we have to understand exactly what they're looking for. The framework uses this term, apologetics. Now, usually when I hear the word apologetics, I think of, someone formally defending a specific religious faith.
Yeah.
Like a theologian debating the existence of God or something.
Yeah, that's the common usage.
But the way they use it in these sources is much broader, isn't it?
Much broader. In this intelligence framework, an apologetic is just any highly sophisticated, internally coherent argument system. Yes, it could be theological, but it could just as easily be an alternative scientific model, or a radically different economic theory, or a new political philosophy.
So it's about the system itself.
Right. What makes an apologetic dangerous to a state isn't that it inherently incites violence, because, if it just incited violence, that would be traditional physical extremism.
Which they know how to handle.
Exactly. That's easy to police. What makes it incredibly dangerous is its persuasive power. Intelligence agencies are constantly watching the cultural radar to see if a specific apologetic might reach a critical mass of human adoption that could, disrupt the status quo.
It's like viewing a highly persuasive idea as a mimetic hazard. If you think about it in IT security terms, it's like a software virus that could literally rewrite the operating system of a nation.
That is a great way to put it.
The state doesn't care if the code is good or bad, only whether it's going to crash their servers.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, states actually require a Goldilocks zone of managed belief.
A Goldilocks zone.
Yeah, think about the delicate balancing act a government has to pull off. A population's core beliefs must be strong enough to motivate them, to keep them paying taxes, obeying laws, staying productive. But those beliefs must remain just fragmented enough so they don't unify citizens across international borders.
Oh, wow.
Because if a belief system becomes so globally compelling that your loyalty to that idea overrides your loyalty to your country.
Then the whole system breaks.
Right. The entire Westphalian system, that fundamental concept of modern nation-states with strict borders and sovereign governments that we've had since the 1600s, is suddenly deeply threatened.
But what happens when an idea is too complex to just ban outright? I mean, you can't just outlaw thoughts in a free society. If states view these ideas as viruses, how do they write the antivirus software to contain them without anyone noticing?
That's the real trick.
Our material outlines a specific playbook, highlighting two major mechanisms institutions use to neutralize these mimetic hazards. The first one is called epistemic flattening.
Yeah, and epistemic flattening is a subtle, almost invisible, but incredibly devastating tool. It happens when complex, highly nuanced arguments are deliberately crushed down into a simple binary choice.
So it's an oversimplification tactic.
Exactly. The discourse is always framed as the rational consensus versus dangerous extremism. By flattening the conversation into those two extreme poles, institutions completely avoid the risk of engaging with legitimate anomalies or highly sophisticated critiques.
It's like taking a beautifully complex three-dimensional hologram and just crushing it onto a flat two-dimensional piece of paper. You lose all the depth.
They lose all the nuance, yeah.
Suddenly, you aren't a skeptic with legitimate questions. You are just lumped into the anti-science or anti-democracy bucket. It forces you to spend all your energy defending yourself against the extreme label rather than discussing your actual point.
Which is very effective.
I do want to push back on this a little bit, though, or at least play devil's advocate, using the exact example from our deep dive, Young Earth Creationism, or YEC.
Okay, let's look at that.
The text points out that mainstream institutions refuse to engage with specific YEC anomalies, things like the timing of the Cambrian explosion. For those who aren't evolutionary biologists, that's this sudden, massive burst of complex life forms in the fossil record that can be, tricky to explain with standard gradual evolution.
Right.
Or epigenetic inheritance, which is how traits can pass down outside of just base DNA mutations. But couldn't mainstream scientific institutions refusing to engage with those specific anomalies just be genuine, well-earned scientific confidence? I mean, maybe they just feel the science is settled, rather than this being some covert, intelligence-style management strategy.
That is a highly valid critique, and, it absolutely has to be considered. It could totally be genuine scientific confidence. But the framework we are analyzing suggests we have to look past the science and look at the structural incentives of the state.
The underlying motives.
Right. Validating the apologetic infrastructure of young Earth creationism, even just bringing them to the table and admitting, hey, you actually have a point on this one specific methodological gap in the fossil record, could drastically strengthen massive, globally connected Christian nationalist movements. And those movements, if they reach critical mass, inherently threaten secular governance. So the flattening, the absolute refusal to even risk a public debate, acts as an epistemic containment strategy. You don't defeat the argument in the arena, you just ensure it never even gets a ticket into the building.
That makes perfect sense. But flattening only works if you can completely control the narrative. What happens when an idea or an event is too widespread or too undeniable to just squash?
That requires a totally different strategy.
Right, which brings us to the second mechanism in the playbook. Manufactured ambiguity, or, to use a brilliant metaphor from the text, a narrative DDoS attack.
I love that term, exactly. When an apologetic can't be flattened, you flood the system with noise. A DDoS attack, for those who aren't tech nerds, is when hackers flood a website with millions of fake traffic requests until the server gets overwhelmed and just crashes.
So a narrative DDoS is the exact same thing, applied to human attention.
Yes. You flood the news cycle with so much contradictory noise that the truth simply crashes. The textbook example of this is the UAP, or UFO, phenomenon. It is the absolute masterpiece of managed ambiguity.
The Pentagon's handling of UAPs is just wild when you look at it through the structural lens. You have simultaneous confirmation and denial happening in the exact same news cycle.
It's dizzying.
You have official, declassified government reports saying, yes, these are real physical objects displaying flight characteristics entirely beyond our understanding, while simultaneously, other government offices are aggressively debunking specific cases as weather balloons.
Right.
You have incredibly serious military whistleblowers getting mixed up in the media algorithms with obvious grifters, hoaxers, and sci-fi movie promotions.
And the goal there isn't to hide the truth entirely. The goal is perpetual, exhausting uncertainty. Think about the geopolitical and philosophical implications of full disclosure.
That would be massive.
Whether UAPs are revealed to be non-human intelligence or just radically advanced foreign technology, a full, undeniable resolution would be incredibly destabilizing to the societal operating system.
It would rewrite everything.
It would instantly validate or destroy multiple apologetic frameworks overnight, whether that's materialist atheism, biblical cosmology, or just our deeply held sense of human exceptionalism. By manufacturing ambiguity, giving you just enough evidence to keep you arguing but never enough to prove it, the state prevents any single disruptive narrative from achieving dominance.
Okay, so this playbook, epistemic flattening and manufactured ambiguity, sounds theoretically terrifying. But if we want to prove this is a real phenomenon and not just some academic thought experiment, we have to look at declassified history. Where has this exact antivirus software actually been deployed?
We have a great example of that.
Yeah, we actually have a massive, fully documented threat assessment from the 1980s, the CIA's war against liberation theology in Latin America.
This is the historical anchor for sure. This is where the framework is proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. During the Cold War, the CIA explicitly identified liberation theology, which was a grassroots synthesis of Marxist social analysis and Catholic theology, as a massive threat to U.S. interests in the region.
And crucially, they didn't just label it as a violent insurgent group.
No, in their own classified internal assessments, they identified the theology itself as a powerfully symbolic force that promoted sweeping socioeconomic reform and was intrinsically anti-Western. The belief system was the weapon.
So how do you counter a belief system that is rapidly spreading among millions of impoverished people? You can't exactly arrest every local parish priest who talks about poverty.
No, you definitely can't.
So the CIA ran a covert cultural operation. Break down how they actually executed this divide and conquer strategy, because they didn't just argue against it.
No, they didn't argue at all. They fought theology with theology. And they did it by basically buying up the cultural bandwidth. The CIA funded what we would now recognize as massive influencer operations.
Wait, really? Influencer operations in the 80s?
Absolutely. For instance, documentary evidence confirms the CIA bankrolled Father Patrick Peyton's Rosary Crusade in Latin America. Peyton actually framed the Rosary as the ultimate WMD, a weapon of mass devotion.
Weapon of mass devotion. That is insane.
The goal was to counter the horizontalist gospel of liberation theology, which focused on earthly social justice with a top-down message of anti-communist, heavily spiritualized Marian devotion.
And they didn't limit themselves to Catholic influencers either.
Yeah.
They utilized massive American evangelical networks like Pat Robertson's Christian Broadcasting Network, right?
Yes. While the liberation theologians were preaching structural social justice in local villages, Robertson's network was blasting the gospel of individual enterprise across the airwaves. The CIA leveraged these massive networks to platform right-wing dictators, like Efrain Rios Montt in Guatemala. They portrayed him to millions of viewers across the Americas as a man of deep, upright faith, completely bypassing and drowning out reports of his horrific human rights record.
They just swept it under the rug.
They even funneled millions of dollars through organizations like World Vision International to artificially create a massive, well-funded evangelical counterweight in the region.
This is the ultimate execution of epistemic flattening. Instead of debating the theology of poverty and social justice, they just funded a massive media-savvy alternative to drown it out.
Exactly.
If you were a peasant in Guatemala in 1983, the grassroots liberation priest had a localized voice in a small church. But the state-backed evangelical broadcast had a megaphone, massive production value. It was playing on literally every radio station. They manufactured an entirely different religious movement to compete for the exact same demographic, and they won through sheer market dominance.
Precisely. They didn't engage the arguments. They engaged the population with a louder, better-funded, state-aligned alternative. It is textbook epistemic integrity engineering.
Having seen the historical playbook out in the open, thanks to the beauty of declassified documents, how can we spot this happening today? To understand that, we need to compare a nation that manages these dynamics completely out in the open with allegations of covert management happening right now in the United States.
Right, let's look at the open book first. Israel.
Yeah.
Israel is a fascinating case study because it lacks a formal constitution separating church and state. Because of that unique legal structure, its religious balance of power has to be managed publicly, entirely out in the open. The state has explicit demographic security concerns that force this kind of epistemic management right into the daylight.
We're looking at projections from the Institute for National Security Studies, the INSS in Israel. They openly project that Haredi, or ultra-Orthodox Jews, will make up 41% of draft-age males by the year 2050. And the INSS doesn't treat this as just an interesting demographic footnote.
No, not at all.
They openly frame this specific theology as an existential security danger to military manpower.
And that is because Haredi theology historically emphasizes rigorous Torah study over military service and secular workforce participation. The State of Israel recognizes a terrifying mathematical reality. If this specific theological apologetic reaches a high enough critical mass, the national security apparatus literally runs out of soldiers to defend the borders.
That they have to manage it.
So the state actively and openly manages this belief system by negotiating complex military exemptions, controlling the chief rabbinate through strategic political appointments, and even having the Shin Bet monitor domestic religious incitement.
Israel is practically the open beta test for the epistemic management that other nations run covertly in the background. Which brings us to the covert allegations in the United States today. Our material dives into a very contemporary case study. Candace Owens' recent highly publicized allegations regarding Calvary Chapel and Turning Point USA, or TPUSA.
This is where things get really sensitive.
Right. Let's be incredibly clear here for you listening, because it's so easy to get lost in the modern culture war. We aim to separate the politics from the plumbing. Regardless of what you think about Candace Owens or TPUSA, or where you fall on the political spectrum, we are strictly looking at the raw structural data from the sources to see if it matches the framework we just discussed. We are not endorsing her claims or taking sides.
That distinction is vital. We are purely analyzing structural anomalies reported in the text. Owens alleged that these specific conservative organizations are actually intelligence-connected operations designed to manufacture Christian Zionists and strictly control evangelical political theology in America.
Again, we aren't judging the truth of the claim or the theology itself.
Right. But the structural anomalies surrounding TPUSA make it a perfect subject for this diagnostic framework. For instance, TPUSA's rapid scaling is, from an organizational standpoint, staggering. They went from a $79,000 budget in 2012 to an $80 million annual budget in just a few years.
And alongside that massive velocity, there is significant funding opacity, meaning it's hard to tell where the money actually originated. You have $13.1 million coming from the previously unreported Wayne Duddleston Foundation and another $23.6 million from the Bradley Impact Fund.
Which is a very specific type of fund.
Yeah, that second one is a donor-advised fund, which is a legal mechanism that entirely obscures the original sources of the money. You just see the fund, not the individual donors.
Then you add in the political theological fusion. You have Calvary Chapel's Real Impact Ministry actively training over 200 churches in legislative lobbying, providing them with a biblical rationale for political activism.
But the response is what's really fascinating, structurally speaking.
Exactly. What is most telling is the institutional response to these allegations. When Owens pointed out these specific funding structures and growth metrics, the institutional response wasn't to transparently open the books and explain the financials.
No. Instead, institutions aggressively dismissed her by associating her with her completely unrelated fringe claims about time travel and ancient technology.
It is a textbook example of narrative contamination. You take a legitimate structural critique about dark money funding and rapid scaling, and you drown it by associating the critic with total absurdity.
It's conspiracy theory labeling used as a weapon to suppress internal dissent and completely avoid substantive engagement on the money.
Exactly. It's the antivirus software running in real time.
So if this epistemic management is a universal phenomenon, I mean, we see it openly managed in Israel, we see the undeniable historical proof with the CIA in the 80s, and we see the structural anomalies happening in domestic politics today, how do you, the everyday citizen, identify it? How do you reclaim your agency in an invisible war?
It's tough, but there is a way.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The sources provide a universal diagnostic framework, a three-tier indicator system designed specifically for the public to audit their own beliefs.
Think of it as a forensic toolkit for your information diet. The first tier is red, or critical. This is direct, documented evidence of operational coordination. Think FOIA releases, declassified internal memos, or whistleblower testimony showing state or corporate money directly flowing to religious or political influencers.
If you see a red indicator, the movement is managed.
The second tier is orange, or warning. These are structural anomalies. If you see a grassroots movement with a velocity index showing financial growth 5 times the industry standard, or funding opacity where over 30% of their money is from untraceable dark money sources, or if you witness a severe, organized suppression of internal dissent.
What we just talked about.
Right. Those are massive warning signs. They suggest managed growth rather than organic word-of-mouth network effects. And the third tier is yellow, or watch. This is when you see historical template matches. You notice the exact same epistemic flattening or manufactured ambiguity that we saw with the UE phenomenon or Latin America.
Okay, let's play a game with this so we can really understand it. Say I see a massive new grassroots environmental movement spring up out of nowhere. Kids protesting in every major city, incredibly high production value on their social media. How do I apply this? How do we prevent this diagnostic toolkit from just becoming a witch hunt against a movement I might just politically disagree with?
That's the danger, isn't it?
It would be so easy to point at an organization on the other side of the political aisle and scream, aha, you're an astroturfed CIA front.
This raises an important question, and it is the absolute most critical safeguard in the entire framework. The diagnosis must focus purely on the plumbing, never the water. You are looking for structural signatures.
Right.
If you FOIA a government agency and find they wired $10 million to the protest organizers, that's red.
Mm.
If you just see their budget went from $10,000 to $50 million in 6 months and the donors are all anonymous offshore accounts, that's orange. You never, ever judge the content of the belief itself.
You don't ask if planting trees is good or bad.
Exactly. You have to ask yourself a very uncomfortable question. Would I make this exact same claim of covert management if this movement aligned perfectly with my own political views? The goal of this framework is absolute transparency, not censorship. It's about ensuring communities aren't being covertly manipulated as pawns on a chessboard, regardless of what they believe.
So what does this all mean for you? Why do we take you down this deep dive today? It's about epistemic sovereignty. It is your fundamental human right to know if your information environment, the very soil that your worldview grows in, is being covertly managed, fertilized, or poisoned by powerful institutions.
Because the ethical violation highlighted today isn't necessarily that states try to manage beliefs. I mean, every society throughout all of human history has to maintain some level of cohesion to survive.
The violation is that they do so covertly, entirely denying you informed consent.
It's the profound difference between a public health mandate being openly debated and voted on in a legislature versus a medical experiment being conducted on a population without the patient's knowledge. The ultimate takeaway from analyzing all of this is a demand for respect for human agency.
Yeah.
People are resilient, they can handle the truth, let the chips fall where they may, but let them fall visibly out in the open where everyone can see them.
We've talked heavily about government intelligence agencies today.
Yeah.
We've looked at the CIA, the Pentagon, the Shin Bet. But as you scroll through your social media feeds tomorrow morning, I want you to ask yourself this. What if the most powerful modern architects of manufactured ambiguity and epistemic flattening aren't government spies in tailored suits at all? What if they are the opaque corporate algorithms of massive tech companies covertly managing your beliefs, flattening your nuances, and artificially farming your outrage just to keep you clicking?
You know that uh, that is a mimetic hazard worth thinking about.